So I just came back from an exciting trip to New Orleans, and as someone who is a record collector and someone who has grown an affinity for jazz in general, I knew I had to visit the city one more time in my life, and so I got that opportunity. So I did recap my time there, so if you haven't checked that out, definitely check that out first. But in this video, I'm going to go through the records that I came home with. I believe that these records kind of encapsulate the New Orleans sound in different ways. They're not the most iconic records, but they are definitely classics in my books. There were a few on my want list that I didn't get a chance to find, but I believe that these ones are fantastic and definitely worth adding to your collection. I have a New Orleans jazz legend. I have the Aretha Franklin of New Orleans. And finally, I have a record that was recommended by the folks at Euclid Records. It's essentially a native New Orleans / funk album. So if you're looking for something quite unique, definitely stay tuned. But before I get to that, I want to talk about the record store that I visited. As mentioned in my previous video, I had very little time to explore the city, but I did manage to check out this record shop, which is approximately a 20-minute bus ride from the French Quarter. Euclid Records is the second of two locations. The first one is in St. Louis, which was opened in the 80s. But this location is massive. Now, I only learned afterwards that there were 2 floors, and so I only got a chance to really explore the first floor. The guys working there were very friendly. I had a want list. I showed them my want list and guided me through some records that they had, as well as the ones that they didn't have. And the guy actually recommended to me a similar record that I will talk about in a sec. They've got a nice turntable set up to sample the used records. However, I did find that their reissues were a little bit on the pricier end. I was comparing to prices on Discogs, and oftentimes they were more expensive than what I saw there. And so I kind of ignored the price, to be honest, because I was there for a very limited time and I wanted to get my hands on the records that I've been eyeing. But they do have a lot of fairly priced records as well. One thing I do appreciate about their setup is that they're very organized, so it's very easy to find music that you're looking for. And if you can't find it initially, definitely speak to the guys and I'm sure they'll be happy to help you out. And so if you're looking for, friendly staff, if you're looking for a wide array of genres, if you're looking for New Orleans-based musicians, definitely check out Euclid Records. So the first record I want to highlight is from Irma Thomas, who I've labeled the Aretha Franklin of New Orleans. She's a soul artist, and not a lot of iconic soul artists came out of New Orleans, but Irma Thomas is definitely one of them that broke through the mold. To me, her sound is a little bit more like Etta James, but she did have that presence of someone like Aretha Franklin in New Orleans, and so that's why I called her that. But this is the album that contains her iconic track, Anyone Who Knows What Love Is Will Understand, which you might have heard if you are familiar with the Netflix series Black Mirror. It was featured on, I believe, 6 different episodes in different ways, and so it's a recurring Easter egg in the entire series, and it goes to show that this song was definitely special in the writer's eyes. What's unique about Irma Thomas is that she sounded a little bit different from her peers at the time. She had more of like a southern flair combined with that polished sound that soul is known for. So I really like her vocals front to back. I particularly like the songs Take a Look, Never Get Used To, and He's My Guy. A lot of them have to do with love, and so if you like that soulful sound with a little bit of grit in her voice, definitely check out Irma Thomas's Take a Look. This cover is not the original cover. The original cover features her face, which I personally prefer. This one is a little bit more abstract. It's featuring a light bulb. I'm not sure what the significance is, but my only guess is that since it's called Take a Look, light helps you see better, and so maybe they're alluding to that. This is released on Music on Vinyl, who are known for reissuing classic records. This was among the top of my want list, so I knew I had to come home with this, and I've been playing it constantly since I've got back. It's such an easy listen and so soothing as I'm working from home as well. This next record I've been bumping constantly since coming back. This is the self-titled The Wild Magnolias. Now, this is one of the records that the record shop worker recommended to me. I was looking for another record by the Wild Pachulias, I think is what they're called. And he said this was something very similar. And so he kind of labeled it as a funk record. What makes this record groundbreaking is that this was the first time that a tribe like the Wild Magnolias worked together with some funk instruments. And so this was never heard before until then. And so this is a very groundbreaking album, combining the traditional percussion sounds of the tribe as well as the funk sounds that were prevalent in the 70s. When I sampled this album for the first time, I was immediately hooked. I was just blown away by how they combined those traditional percussion instruments, which is what they were known for, with the funk sound of the 70s. Now, a little bit of history. The Wild Magnolias were a native tribe that had some members from the Native Americans as well as the Africans that came over during those early days. And so you get a sense of the sounds prior to the funk era on this album. A lot of call and response, which is what Africans were known for. So as you can see on the back here, they've got these extravagant costumes that cost thousands to make, but they're so unique and representative of their culture, and something that you rarely see, in my opinion, in American music these days. So if you want something that's representative of the New Orleans tribes and culture, definitely check out the Wild Magnolias. Some of the standout tracks are Honda Wanda, which is the first track, Smoke My Peace Pipe, Smoke It Right. It's such a fun track, I guess, about smoking, but it's such a vibe listening to it. My personal favorite is Somebody Got Soul, Soul, Soul. Nice call and response there. It's funky, but soulful in some way. And in my opinion, they have the funkiest version of When the Saints Go Marching In on the tail end of this album. If you didn't know, this song was written in New Orleans, and so this song is titled Saints, but it's the longest track, and it's so groovy. It's such a vibe, and it's such a great way to end the album. This one is a modern reissue from the Jackpot record label, and features this kind of pale turquoisey marble vinyl, which I think is quite nice with the orange center. So a little modern touch to the classic record. But if you like funk, if you like unique genres, definitely check out this Wild Magnolias album. You will not regret it. And of course, I couldn't leave New Orleans without coming home with a jazz record. This is the George Lewis Memorial Album, which is actually a reissue from the original titled The Singing Clarinet. So when George Lewis died, they reissued it and changed the title of the album to honor George Lewis. For those who know a little bit about the history of jazz, you know that Buddy Bolden is widely credited for inventing the genre. Louis Armstrong then transformed the genre by shifting it from a collective improvisational genre to something that harnessed the art of the soloist. What George Lewis did that very few New Orleans jazz-based artists did was actually stay in the city of New Orleans. A lot of them traveled to Chicago or New York and toured around all over the US, but George Lewis remained in the city and preserved the sound till the day he died. Around the 40s is when the swing or bebop jazz genres started to emerge and become more popular. And so what George Lewis aimed to do was revive and preserve that original New Orleans jazz sound. He's one of the first recurring members to perform at the Preservation Hall as well. And again, if you haven't seen my first video, I break down my experience at this legendary jazz club. The sound of this album is, as I said, traditional jazz known as now Dixieland jazz. The tracks you'll hear on this album are essentially what jazz sounded like in its early days. However, this album in particular features a lot of blues influence, another genre that was very popular around the 30s, 20s. And so half of the tracks here actually contain the word blues in their titles. So while traditional New Orleans jazz is upbeat and rowdy, you get a little bit of somber sounds to this record, especially on Jerusalem Blues, Dallas Blues, and Tin Roof Blues. So if you like that combination of that blues kind of swagger to it, as well as the horns of jazz, this is such a great listen. I love the cover. The original cover wasn't super exciting in my opinion, but I love the black and white face of George Lewis here. It's timeless. It pays homage to the legend himself. And yeah, this album was a great listen front to back, and a great representation of Dixieland or traditional New Orleans jazz. Now, a little bit of a bonus, right behind me, you'll see George Lewis at the Preservation Hall. This one I actually didn't pick up in New Orleans, but rather in Cologne. There was a record shop that had a budget sale, and this was in the €2 bin. And so I knew I had to grab it. It was right before my trip to New Orleans, and this was the first sample of New Orleans jazz that I really heard on vinyl. This is probably the most iconic George Lewis album, so if you do find this, it's pretty easy to find. Definitely check it out. It's affordable. It's another great sample of that Dixieland traditional jazz sound, more upbeat than the Memorial album. And as you can see, there's a number 4 there. So this is actually a series created by the Preservation Hall. So there are multiple albums of live recordings at the Preservation Hall. If you're not visiting New Orleans, but wanted to know what it sounds like at the legendary jazz club, definitely check out records in this series. This record pays homage to the legendary Jelly Roll Morton on songs like Wine and Boy Blues. It also features a classic traditional song in the suite By and By, and plenty of classic New Orleans tracks. So if there's another record I would recommend that is a great representation of that early New Orleans sound, definitely check out this one by the George Lewis Band. So that wraps up my record haul. I only came home with 3 records, but in my opinion, they are classics. They are representative of the New Orleans sound, which is not just jazz, but soul, funk. There was one artist I was looking for that I didn't come home with, and that was Allen Toussaint. He is a legendary soul, rock, bluesy artist out of New Orleans and has come out with some iconic and classic albums. So if I do get a chance to go back, I'll definitely keep my eyes peeled for one of his records. If you are familiar with any other New Orleans-based artists, definitely write them in the comments below, and I'll try to get my hands on them whenever I can. But New Orleans is such a unique city with such rich culture and history, and it bleeds through the music, through the voices of the artists I mentioned behind me. So if you enjoyed that video and you want to see more, definitely subscribe to this channel, like this video if you did enjoy it, and I'm also on Instagram and TikTok for more bite-sized content. I've created this channel to help people slow down and experience life while going against the grain of the hustle and bustle culture. So with that, I encourage you to slow down, take a sip, and drop the needle. See you in the next one. Peace.